If you had a band now,
yeah.
if you had to start a career in music now,
yeah.
how would you approach it? How would you put yourself out there to be considered the way you've actually been considered, rather than a one-hit wonder as they mostly are now?
Well, you need to have like-minded souls who you can interact with and write with and perform with, even if you're going to be a band that decides to do cover versions of things. So you need sympathetic people. You need to have a kind of chemistry between you, and then I think the route of not being dependent on a patron in the form of a record company is probably a very good thing, because then the band gets a chance to develop in its own sweet way. So there's no substitute for the hard graft of playing the small gigs that you could just about get together, and eventually making a record of something which hopefully you'll refine in some way or another. And nothing has to be nothing really has to be rejected. Years ago I used to read the I Ching, and I noticed that it had in it a subheading. It was work on that which has been spoiled. So this is something that Confucius was talking about all those years ago in China. But what's interesting is that applies directly to the music business. You can always do a re-record of a song that's been bypassed. You can always reconvene in a different sort of way. I've seen it even with Genesis, the band that I was in years ago. Sometimes someone would present a song or a riff, and the band would bypass it and not use it until maybe the next album or the album after that, or down the line. And very often something like that will become a hit. So it's a case of stick to your guns. Just because something's been rejected, or even if you've been rejected yourself, doesn't mean to say it's a bad idea or that you're bad at it. So it's having the confidence to be able to say, no, I think this is a really good idea. You know, represent it, come back with it again, knock on more doors. You've got to do that. You've got to network, and you can't live in splendid isolation. You can't be a legend in your own bedroom alone. You've got to get out there and keep pushing yourself forward.
Talking about your tour and your gigs coming up in the UK, what can we expect in terms of set list?
Well, I am changing the set list substantially. I'm including some new stuff. I'm including some
new
songs.
Not in the last album.
The stuff that's not in the last album, no. I'm going back to tunes that some of them haven't been performed live. Some have been, or some of them haven't been performed for a very long time. So I'm going back to a classic era, but at the same time I try and do a third current material, a third classic material, and a third Genesis things, and mix it. And on one of the shows I'm even going to be doing a version of a Dylan tune, which Hendrix covered and made a huge hit of, All Along the Watchtower. When I'm playing with John Wetton in London, we're going to be doing a version of that. So I like to take a sort of flexible look at it and keep changing the set stuff.
Talking about Genesis, since you still include them in your set list, I know there is no possibility of a reunion, as you said last time. But I also know you're still in a good relationship. Did you ever talk about collaboration on each other's projects?
Yes, from time to time. We work with each other in a small way from time to time. Mike Rutherford joined me on a charity thing many years ago. There was something I was involved with the Vietnamese boat people, and he gave his time freely, as did Peter Gabriel with one or two projects for charity things. So it seems as if the cause is good enough, or if the cause is sympathetic enough, and that seems to happen. But it's harder to reconvene Genesis these days for all sorts of reasons. I wish I could wave a magic wand and say, yes, it'll happen and there'll be a full band reunion, but I've always said I'm up for it, you know. But you know, there are various issues around it. There'll be people's individual agendas, but I've always said I'm very proud of the time I spent in the band, and although officially it's a retired entity, I'm anything but retired. I'm doing more and more shows, and I wouldn't even say doing my bit to keep that stuff alive. I do it because I still love it. There's a lot of tunes that I think are wonderful that we did in the early days, and yeah, you know, good music doesn't go away. If you're lucky, it becomes perceived as classic. I mean, at one time, of course, classic material had to be 100 years ago at least, but you know, now it's anything good still makes sense to you.
Steve, you had a very fulfilling career both with Genesis and on your own.
Yes.
You've been inducted to the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Is there any achievement in your heart that you're still looking forward to?
Well, it's funny. No matter what, you know, plaudits you get and what awards you get, and no matter what you sell, I always think I'm starting out. I'm always starting out because there's always something new to do. There's always a new challenge, and it might just be, you know, doing something in the classical area, doing something that might be with an orchestra, or it might be honouring a great composer with a small piece that I can finally get my fingers around. Yeah, there's still many more things to achieve, and as I say, I'm always starting out. I'm still, you know, knocking on the door of film, you know, ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille, or rather, ready to do your soundtrack. You know, all of those things. So I'm really open. There's always something new that a musician can do that he hasn't done last time. Rock music's part of it, but that's not the total of music. There's wonderful things that have been done in film, wonderful orchestral things. I mean, I'm particularly fond of the 1930s, where there were great orchestral scores accompanying things. I'm thinking of composers like Max Steiner, and then latterly Miklos Rozsa, who was involved with so many of those epics, and you know, you just got the feeling that what was going on the screen was made much wider by the weight of all that music. I'm thinking of Gone with the Wind. Love that, the beautiful romanticism of that, you know. And the Warsaw Concerto from Dangerous Moonlight, I think, you know, where you've got music written worthy of Rachmaninoff. They tried to hire Rachmaninoff for it, or they wanted to use Rachmaninoff music, and he said no, I gather, and they hired the lesser known Richard Ansel, who wrote a wonderful, moving piece of music in the style of that. So I'm looking forward to that. I've done a little bit with film. I did some music for a documentary that was based on a Holocaust survivor, an artist who forged papers to give to Jewish people because he said the Nazis were great bureaucrats, and the reason he survived was because he was a forger. And so I did some music for this thing. It was called Outwitting Hitler. And I would like to do more with that particular filmmaker, as it happens. You know, as life progresses, I hope that I'll be around long enough to do something in film, and That doesn't have to be Hollywood. That can be Europe. That can be anywhere. So I'm up for all sorts of things. You know, it's funny. Last night I went along to something. Joanne and my partner and I, we went along to an orchestral interpretation of some Genesis stuff last night at the Barbican. And I thought all these guys who are trained to play all sorts of things, from Beethoven to Bach to anything, you know, at that moment when they're on stage, they are music's servant. They will play whatever written in front of them, and I think there's honour in that, you know, in the classical world. So I have huge respect for people who've been schooled and are professional to the extent where they'll take a bow at the end of playing some variations on Genesis, or they'll take a bow on playing anything. It might be Mendelssohn, but equally those same people might be performing a Pink Floyd tribute the next week, and I think it takes a lot of discipline for them to be able to do what they do. So I've got enormous respect and love of what orchestras are capable of doing.
Okay, is there anything that I haven't asked and you would like to say?
I can't think of anything, but I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for such a nice interview.
Thank you very much for your time.